U3a4 going to talk about a particular movie in film history called Birth of a Nation. We're going to go in a deeper investigation into film technology and how film has changed over time, and we're going to use this one film to do it. It's a 1915 silent film, so it's a very, very old movie that we're analyzing today. Directed by D.W. Griffith, largely considered by today to be the father of cinema. And it laid the groundwork for modern movies. So this is the first movie that really creates the film genre as we know it today. It's a 1915 silent film, D.W. Griffith, as I said. It's a good example of a silent film. It's an incredibly innovative movie, but it is completely and totally racist. Here's the film poster. Yes, I'm not making this up. This is a glorious Ku Klux Klan rider being shown as a hero. This movie is abhorrently, disgustingly racist by today's standards, but we're going to try to talk about it in its historical context and at the same time give it credit for what it does contribute to the modern film era. So there's that poster again. Sorry to beat you over the head with it, but you're going to have to get used to it. It's an incredibly offensive movie by today's standards. First of all, the movie is shot on an epic scale. It covers the Civil War. It actually starts before the Civil War. It goes through the Civil War and includes a great deal of Reconstruction in the South. In fact, it's set in Georgia. It's about two white families, one northern family and one southern family, and their complex interactions over time and over decades as the story takes place. It's a 3-hour-long film. And then after the war is over during Reconstruction, blacks in the South riot, and the Ku Klux Klan is going to come riding to the rescue at the end of this movie, and then the movie is going to celebrate at the end while blacks are disenfranchised of their right to vote. Like I said, racist film, that's the plot summary. Okay, so why would we even watch something like this today? First of all, this is the first movie to show the possibilities of film as a storytelling art form. Up to this point in time, before 1915, movies had been short. They had been lightweight. They had been not serious. They had been trivial in many, many ways. This is the first time that a director, in this case D.W. Griffith, steps to the fore in order to show the world what's possible through the medium of film. The fact that the story itself is racist is not really of interest to us today. What's of interest is the many technological innovations that Griffith invented for this movie. The movie's part of our history. We can't deny that it happened or that it had a huge impact on not just movies, the genre of film, but on our culture as it even stands today. And I'll try to explore that a little bit in this tutorial. We need to keep it in its historical context. We can't pretend this movie came out today, and we can't analyze it as if it came out today. We need to see it for what it was at the moment and at the time that it came out. So, that being said, let's start here. So this is during the war section of the movie, and we've seen all kinds of dramatic action. We've seen this long-distance shot here. See the depth available in that shot. Notice the camera pans left. It's very hard for cameras to pan back then. Cameras did not move much before 1915. And then we see the contrast between the people in the distance versus this one person comforting a little child in the foreground. Look at the difference between the foreground and the background in this shot right here as it shows that dramatic difference. Notice that the picture is square, not wide like today's movies. All right? There are hundreds of extras in this film, a huge, large-scale production. I talked about the depth of it. Note the choreography in the battle scene that's about to come up to show excitement. Notice how much visual energy there is in these shots, going from foreground to background. I'll move on to the next one. Alright, this is a detail from the shot I showed you before. Notice that the camera irises in. The camera has that black circle that gets smaller. Up to the cameras could not zoom at this point. So Griffith is irising in to make sure the audience sees what's important. Today, we would think of that as kind of obvious. Well, of course the person comforting the girl is important. But in Griffith's era, he wanted to make sure that the audience saw what he wanted them to see, and so he's bringing our attention to that with this iris shot. here's a lovely close-up of a girl, Elsie, and her father. So here they are, just being playful, talking, doing family stuff in the foreground, and then we cut to the close-up to reveal the emotion in order to show what's going on. This is the first movie that does this. We take close-ups for granted today because D.W. Griffith gave them to us to show emotion, to bring the audience into the film. This is very different from stage plays. At the beginning of movies, they were just plays like you would put on a stage for a camera instead of for an audience. But this shows us for the first time what's possible. You can move the camera around during the story in order to help bring the audience into the story. Very different. Okay, here's a long sequence with various colors. Okay, so it starts over. First of all, this is a lightly colored shot. It might be out of doors. It's easygoing. There's these two brothers. They're from these two different families, northern and southerner, and they're teasing each other about their clothes. Notice the color of this. Remember, this is a black and white film. Now we cut to green. And yes, indeed, those actors are wearing blackface. These are white actors pretending to be black. Incredibly offensive, of course. This is showing, I'm going to pause this just for a second. That little section right there is showing, supposedly, during slavery. This is before the war, and these slaves are happy and they're dancing for their white slave owners to show how good and happy their lives are. Of course, completely disgusting. Also, by today's standards, we would never have a white actor wear blackface to portray a black person. Also offensive by today's standards. That was the norm in 1915, unfortunately. So then there's this sequence right here, colored red. It's a black and white film, but what's done is it is actually tinted. So they take the black and white film after they develop it, and they dye it. They dip the film into a dye to color it for different scenes, and they edit that together. That produces a color-like effect. This is not color film. It's black and white that's been tinted. In this case, battle is tinted red, whereas the pastoral scene with the slaves is tinted green to make it, I don't know, nicer looking. Notice the all the use of close-ups going back and forth between close-ups when he charges out here versus the long shots to show depth, the back and forth motion, the tight editing, the large cast, all the action, the special effects, the smoke, the fires, the cannons. This is all new stuff in 1915. Very exciting for theater goers to see these kinds of things. Stain the film, indoor versus outdoor you might show. You might stain it different colors to show night versus day, or just to convey a certain mood. Now, also when we talk about the music a little bit, remember, music recording has not been invented yet in 1915, so this is a silent film in addition to being black and white. There usually would be a pianist playing in the theater. While you're watching the movie, you'd hear someone play, or even a full production band could be playing live while the show was going on. And for the first time in this movie, there is an example of a score. So that band of musicians that's playing live in the theater while you're watching this silent film, they're actually following a score that's designed to create music specifically for each scene, not just whatever the band feels like playing to fill the air, but actually choreographed for the movie. This is another first. Okay, This is a really difficult scene to watch. This is towards the very end of the movie. Watch this sequence here from the end of the film first. This is the climax, and then we're going to watch it again, and I'll walk you through it. Okay, so here at the end of the film, there are two families trapped in a cabin. This is well after the Civil War. This is during Reconstruction. There is a riot going on. These black people are rioting against the whites, and they've taken over the town. These two white families are hiding in a cabin as the rioters are trying to break through the door. And here we have one of the main characters of the film, Mr. Stoneman. He is, in order to protect his daughter from the black people charging to the door, he is going to kill her. He's going to murder his own child to prevent what's about to happen here. And then the Ku Klux Klan is going to come riding to the rescue. Yes, you saw it here, as they charge in on their horses to save the day. And we're going to cut back and forth between the dramatic scenes inside the cabin. Yes, again, these are actually white actors in black face pretending to be black characters. Again, here's another family trapped in the same cabin. Watch the progression here. We see the dad holding the rifle butt over his little girl's head, and then we cut to a medium close-up of the mother and the little girl with the rifle butt just dangling over her head, reminding the audience just what a precarious situation this is. And just to reinforce the point, Griffiths then cuts to this close-up, this beautiful, disturbing close-up of the daughter's face as she cries in this horrible situation. And this is a very dramatic, very intense scene. And then we're going to cut back and forth between the chaos and the activity and the Klan riding in. One other thing I want to point out, oh, no, I'm going to talk about it next shot. Never mind. Multiple innovations, the same thing. So, oh yeah, I am going to talk about it here. This is the first example in history of a moving camera. Yes, unfortunately, it's when the Ku Klux Klan is riding in, but you might not have noticed it because you're so used to it. The camera is moving. You can see it tracking backwards. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a motion camera on a horse-drawn wagon. Cars haven't been invented yet, so the only way to move a camera, and keep in mind, cameras could be 300 pounds at this point, is to put it on the back of a horse-drawn wagon and move the camera. So this is so primitive by today's standards, but it invents many of the things we take for granted today, such as moving camera, mixture of close-ups and long shots, dramatic acting, stereotypes, the blackface characters. And I'm going to show you now a scene from the very end to show special effects. So here's a title card, and then there's the very end of the movie, and look at some of the special effects being used here. Okay, so like this title card said, now we're going to dream of a day when there's no more war and the Prince and the Hall of Brotherly Love and the City of Peace. So here is a character holding a sword superimposed on top of this big complex picture designed to show the horrors of war, and he's symbolic of war with his sword making all these people suffer. But no, D.W. Griffith is saying peace will come back after all this horror, after all this bloodshed, and we'll have the Prince of Peace while everyone celebrates in a hall of joy. And notice the contrast between the red, this is dark and scary, versus the blue tint here. Everything is going to be good and peaceful here in the future. This is very early examples of special effects. We still use techniques today like masking or layering video clips on top of each other, sending complex messages with special effects, using visual imagery to mean not just a literal image. This isn't supposed to be literally the Prince of Peace is larger than everyone else. No, he's a symbolic figure intended to just create an idea in the viewer's minds of what could be happening here. Complex messages through special effects. Okay. Once again, keep in mind, before 1915, movies were much shorter, they were much simpler, they did not have these big complex themes, they didn't have such richly complicated characters, they didn't have epic plots like this. Large-scale productions were invented by this movie. The spectacle, the battle scenes, the exciting scenes, the moving cameras, the high drama of what's going on. This seems familiar to you today because this is what movies today do. This movie is the one that creates movies the way we think of them today. And we have to credit D.W. Griffith with this, despite the fact that in 1915 he was stuck in a racist time and was not able to rise above himself to see the horror of the show that he is actually creating. Should we view this today? Well, let me quote Spike Lee here. In 2019, Spike Lee was quoted about when he was in film school studying this movie, Birth of a Nation, and here's what he says. They taught that D.W. Griffith is the father of cinema. They talk about all the innovations, which he did, but they never really talked about the implications of Birth of a Nation, never talked about how that film was used as a recruiting tool for the KKK. I'll try to right that wrong a little bit here. First of all, let's point out that the film is preserved in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. They voted to call this a national historic event, achievement. We also need to say this film probably caused a second rising of the Ku Klux Klan. Undoubtedly, thousands of Ku Klux Klan members were inspired by this film, and undoubtedly it was used as a recruiting tool to generate more members of the KKK. This, of course, is deeply offensive, completely disgusting, and something that we should be horrified by today. But that doesn't mean that we can't watch it. It just means that we should remember the historical context this movie was created in. We can't deny its racism, but we have to recognize the contribution it makes. It's just part of history. And finally, how should you respond to this? Well, see it for yourself. Judge it for yourself. Don't say whether or not you think this movie is okay until you've sat down and watched it and hopefully talked about it with someone else who's being thoughtful about it. Okay, so time to summarize. The movie Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith includes a lot of technical innovations which we still use today, such as iris shots, close-up shots, the idea that movies could have color, the idea that movies could have a large cast or exist on an epic scale. It's the first movie with original music designed for the particular scenes in the movie, and it's the first time a moving camera is used. It's one of the first uses of special effects. The list of firsts is just so big for this movie. However, it's abhorrently racist and disgusting, so it's really got a complicated place in American film history, and we're going to study, I studied this in this class. This is a section on media literacy, but I've included this film because I wanted to go in depth into one movie, and this is a really good movie to do that with. But now the rest of these tutorials will go back to the big picture of media literacy.